excited about my Geek of the Month because they do not come more badass than Arwa Damon. She's a senior international correspondent for CNN, and for nearly 2 decades, she has covered the conflicts in the Middle East and from the front lines. If you've watched any coverage from Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, or elsewhere in the region, you have definitely seen Arwa Damon. She's literally braver than anyone I know, and she's a remarkable storyteller, but she's also extremely compassionate, and she's actively changing the lives of war-wounded children for the better. Arwa co-founded an amazing organization called Inara, which stands for the International Network for Aid, Relief, and Assistance. And I featured this organization on the Crush List because it's doing amazing work providing life-changing medical care for children in conflict zones who've suffered from catastrophic injuries or illnesses and who can't access treatment due to war. A piece of this is also personal to me, because when I was at the White House handling U.S. policy towards Syria, I was watching Arwa's coverage from the ground there. And I feel strongly about her mission, because her fight to save these children and give them a future is something I wasn't able to do sitting on the government side. Arwa herself has an amazing story of how she ended up pursuing journalism, what inspired her to create Inara, and what she finds most exciting and surprising in her work. So I'm really excited to share our conversation. And after you listen, don't forget to visit Inara's website and consider making a donation, however small, because I promise it will make a difference. If I can't convince you, then take it from Arwa, who joined me from Istanbul, Turkey. Hi, Arwa. I'm so excited to have you on. Thank you for joining me on Oh My World.
Thank you. I love it.
Oh, you are. They don't come more badass than you. You are the ultimate Geek of the Month, because the Geek of the Month is all about interviewing those who are trying to change the world and affect change for the better. And you're really crushing it. So I'm super excited. But I want to start back, if you don't mind. If you could just share with everybody, your story, how you started pursuing journalism, what brought you to the front lines.
So I sum it up by saying I literally sold towels and toilets, which is super weird and kind of out there. But basically, I was working for a Turkish textile company, and 9/11 happened, and I was in New York, and I'm Syrian American, grew up very cross-cultural, and I was watching this kind of East-West divide grow in the wake of 9/11 and then the war in Afghanistan, and then the US is gearing up to go to Iraq. And I just had this overwhelming sensation of I need to go, because let's face it, I look very American, like the girl next door, which my mother does kind of, I think, wish I was born, brunette, brown eyes kind of thing. But anyways, but I found that, throughout all of this, I could talk to a Western audience about what was happening over there. And all of a sudden over there was a bit less scary because they could relate to me on a certain level. And so I got it into my head that I was going to get to Iraq and be a reporter. So of course I start applying, all the usual ways to all the networks, including CNN. And I kind of got laughed, over email and told, go start at the bottom, start somewhere, which I of course refused to do. So I quit my Turkish textile job, which, by the way, I was literally selling towels and bathrobes, including for a doggy company. And I
hope you still have some of those towels and, for free.
Yeah, I know, seriously. And so anyways, yeah, I left that job. I took an internship with a small production company that was sending a team over into Iraq. This is before the war started. I'm on the phone with Iraqi officials all the time. And they're like, oh, you're Syrian, you're our sister, come on over. And I was like, well, can you get me a visa? And they're like, yeah, sure, no problem. Visas were like Willy Wonka's golden ticket back then. Everyone wanted a visa. So then I ended up finding another small production company that wasn't able to get visas, got them to take me over, literally clueless. But I was super lucky because the team that I was working with were phenomenal journalists. And from the minute I got there, it was this overwhelming sense of this is where I belong. This is what I want to do. And then I was trying to get hired by CNN. So at this point, the war has already kicked off. I'm in and out of Baghdad. CNN still doesn't want to hire me because I'm the new kid on the block. So I took a job with a Lebanese company that was trying to sell flak jackets and other stuff, including porta-johns, like toilets, to the US military, just to get into Baghdad with them. And I remember we arrived in Baghdad, and I obviously had a sense of, what security protocols should be. But we rock up to this house that they have, and, we all get out, and the tour of the house includes, and here are the AK-47s underneath, the kitchen sink. So if we get attacked, grab one and go to the roof. And I'm going, hell no, this is not going to happen. But, long story short, I knocked on CNN's door, got a face-to-face with the bureau chief at the time. And basically I've been in and out of various different war zones ever since.
It's amazing. And I don't know if I've ever told you this, but there's so much in you that I feel I relate to as a Middle Eastern American, as someone who's always wanted to kind of bridge this divide and gap between both sides. On my end, it was trying to do US foreign policy toward the region because I felt I really understood it. And you've always been this most amazing storyteller and translator in a way. And you've really humanized stories from there. And so because of that, I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about this story that you once wrote about a boy named Yusuf in Iraq. So can you share us a little bit about that story and how he changed your path? Did he inspire you to create Inara? Tell us a little bit about it.
So Yusuf, at the time that we met him, and this is back in 2007, was just 5 years old. And his dad had gone from agency to agency, ministry to ministry, looking for help for his little boy, because Yusuf had gasoline poured on his head, and he was set on fire when he was standing in front of the door of his house. And this was an attack that was carried out by masked men. And nobody knows what their motivation was. I mean, it could have been because his dad worked as a guard for one of the ministries. It could have been because they lived on a sectarian fault line. And look, Iraq 2007, let's face it, wasn't getting the media attention that it used to get. There were still 100 unidentified bodies just popping up in Baghdad alone a day, not to mention the numerous explosions. And so Yusuf's dad brings him to our office. And I just remember looking at this little boy, and his face was this hardened mask of rivers of scar tissue. And he couldn't even open his mouth properly. So he had to shove the grains of rice in between his lips, kind of just a couple at a time. And his little hands were burnt right here because he'd been going like this to try to put the flames out on his face. And so, we told the family that, the only thing that we can do is, tell your little boy's story, but let's face it, Iraq isn't getting the attention that it used to. And so we were quite nervous, as a bureau when the story first began to go out, because we'd all grown attached to Yusuf. And then the response was just insane. I mean, my email blew up, CNN's phone lines blew up. I mean, everybody wanted to help this little boy. And for our staff in Iraq, it was so heartening to watch their reaction, because even though it was just one little boy, they were so moved by the fact that all these strangers out there wanted to help him. And one of my best life moments to date is when I was able to call his parents and say, you are getting help. You're going to America. Yusuf is going to get the treatment that he needs. And so the whole family ends up going to Los Angeles. And they're still there now. I'm still in touch with them. And Yusuf transformed over the years. He, at one point when he was around 11, 12, would tell me that he didn't have direct memories of the attack that happened. I mean, he knew what had happened to him. He saw the old videos, but he didn't have a memory of it. It wasn't his defining moment in life anymore. It's what came after. It was the kindness, the compassion. And so that whole experience, with Yusuf showed me that, as cynical as I can get, and let's face it, we can all be pretty cynical, the kindness of strangers does exist. And there is a way to sort of connect all these different moving parts for these kids that need help. And so fast forward to Syria, 2011, 2012, and no matter how much reporting is going on, Syria is the most documented war of our time, and yet nothing was moving the needle on this worst case scenario trajectory that we could all watch the country barreling towards. And it was in that moment that I realized I have to do more. Like, I cannot just report this story. I'm coming across all these wounded children. I know that there has to be a way to plug all these moving parts together for them. You know, a lot of us were out there in the field. We do this individually anyways. And so why not do it in a more organized, cohesive manner under the umbrella of a charity that can actually fill in the gaps and access to medical care for children who aren't able to find it elsewhere. And so, you know, on the one hand, Inara was born kind of out of my dark mental space. And on the other hand, you know, it pulled me out of it. It gave me a different sense of purpose. And that's been quite beautiful. And it's also, you know, every once in a while, I do need to get reminded that, you know, people can be kind, they can be compassionate. You just need to sometimes figure out ways to pull that out of them.
Yes, I agree. I think one of the reasons why I personally feel strongly about Inara is because I remember being on the other side, trying to work and help craft this Syria policy and feeling like I couldn't do anything to help. And your organization is doing that. I mean, it's just amazing. So can you tell us a little bit about some cases, right? Like some details about exactly what Inara does for these children, maybe some examples.
So we work with war impacted children. And by that, I mean, children have either been injured as a direct result of the war or one of the many side impacts that war can bring. And this is what people don't think a lot about, right? So, you know, a kid flees, maybe is safe, maybe wasn't injured, but then is living in a tent, unsafe living conditions, tent catches fire, child gets injured. And so we will figure out a medical plan for them. And then now we also have in-house mental health treatment, which is super important. And by having it in-house, we can run a child's medical program right alongside their mental health programs, which is like much more holistic approach. And my favorite moments at Inara is when you realize that spark of innocence, that joy that's in a child's eye that you thought was gone when you first met them, when they first started their treatment with us. And it's gone because of, you know, the compounded trauma and everything that they've been through. And you can feel as if it's gone, but then you realize that it's not. It's just been deadened, and it can come back, and it does come back. I mean, there's one little boy, his name is Furat, and he is severely burned. I mean, he has this roped web of thick scar tissue that goes from his chest all the way down past his genitals. And he's hunched over like this. And he's so traumatized by what he went through that when he sees a stranger, he thinks that they're a doctor, and he just associates that with pain and runs away crying. That little boy, when he smiled and held my hand and took me to go down the slide with him, that moment was magic. We have another little girl named Benno. She's Iraqi, and she was injured during the battles with ISIS. Again, you know, a case that happened years ago, but hasn't been able to access medical treatment for 5-6 years. So she lost her hearing in a bombing that happened in an airstrike. And we were able to provide her with a cochlear implant and, you know, get her started with speech therapy. But there's this moment when she has the implant in, and they're starting with like this audio testing that they do. So it's these very faint beeps. And you see this expression on her face when she realizes that she's hearing, and then this laughter that comes out of her mouth. And then you look over at her mom's reaction, and her mom's like crying and laughing and hugging her daughter because she's laughing. Her daughter's laughing for the first time in 5-6 years. And it's brilliant. It's all these, you know, little moments that we create for the children that then allow them to, you know, overcome their injuries, whether it's, you know, medical, physical, or, you know, mental. And that gives them their agency back, in the sense that up until they receive treatment, these children will end up defined by their injury. And quite often this will force them into living in, the dark shadows of their homes. They don't really go out. If they go to school, they're being bullied. They're afraid of the stares. They feel the stares of strangers. They don't have the confidence to go out. But when you can show them a path of healing, it gives them that confidence back. And then they will just grip their future and take charge of it. It's extraordinary. I mean, last example, because I just love these kids. This one young girl, Rula, she's hilarious. She was injured also in a bombing along with her sisters. And, she has a little scarring on her face and also on her hands that we're dealing with. And she looks at me and I was like, what do you want to be in the future? And she says, I'm going to be a human rights lawyer. And I was like, all right. She's like, yeah, I'm not afraid of going for it anymore.
Amazing. I love this story. I love this. These examples are just amazing. I feel myself getting I have goosebumps and tears in my eyes. And it's the change that you're actually affecting in these kids' lives, right? And the hope that you're giving them for the future and how you've changed things for them. What is, before we go, if you can sum up your favorite parts and aspects of having founded Inara, maybe even things that have surprised you along the way.
I think what has really surprised me, which is strange that it surprised me because this is what Inara was founded on, which is basically relying on the kindness of strangers, but how much of our funding actually comes from strangers, from individuals. We probably get about 70% of our funding through our online donations, and recognizing, especially because, the news world, it's so dark and it's so hard to see the good that's out there, that I love these reminders that it is the good that's out there that is actually driving this charity. And when you explain to the parents that, like these donations are coming from people who don't know you, it's not from another organization, it really impacts them in a very different way. And then you see their narrative and the kids' narrative starting to shift, because more often than not, up until that point, especially for the children, their lives are defined by these dark forces, the evil that caused their injury, the cruelty that forced them to flee from their homes, the challenges of just, living as refugees or, internally displaced people. And then that narrative of theirs starts to shift, where a bit more good starts to come in. And you do hear so many of the kids saying things like, I want to be a doctor because I want to help other children like me. And so, yeah, you know what, if you just look at the pure numbers, it's one kid at a time, but we don't know where these kids are going to go with their lives. And we can't turn away because something or a problem might feel like it's overwhelming or too big. Because if we actually want to change, the bigger picture, we have to start with putting together these small pieces. And that's why, I always say, like, no donation is too small. No effort is too insignificant. Like, we just need to come together in all these little pieces to try to build towards this greater good, because I do believe that we have the capacity for it as individuals. We just need to figure out our collective capacity.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I agree with you. I find most of the geeks who watch Oh My World are always asking how they can help. And people like that. They do there's a lot of kindness out there and a lot of compassion. And people like when there's this avenue that, they can make a donation as small as it might be, but know that it's having a very real impact, right? That it's really changing even, while they're seeing this horrible news on a daily basis. And so for that reason, I really want to thank you for your work. It is just so heartening. Whatever we can do here at Oh My World, don't hesitate to let me know, because we will do it. And, keep it up. Thank you. Thank you from on behalf of everybody.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
It's my pleasure, Arwa. Thank you so much. And thanks for joining me and for the opportunity. And you keep crushing it. Oh my God, Isn't she amazing? We need 1,000 Arwas. I find her work to be super important, not only because she's changing these children's lives for the better, but because she's giving them a future and paying it forward. Not only for the life that these children will lead, but also the society they'll grow up in and contribute to. When we talk about Syria in particular, we talk about a lost generation of children, and not only how it negatively impacts them, but also what that means for the future of the region and for international security. That is a huge, huge problem. And so while it may not feel like it now, Inara is fighting that problem one child at a time. So if you're watching the horrible news that comes out of this region and feel like you want to help but don't know how, I promise you that a donation to Inara will go a really long way.